You don't expect to wake up one morning and find out that your own land, your legally owned hard-earned piece of property, has suddenly become a battleground. But that's exactly what happened to me. One day I was just another homeowner, mowing my lawn, minding my business, enjoying my peaceful little slice of the neighborhood. The next, I was smack in the middle of an all-out war with the HOA, a group of entitled power-hungry officers who had convinced themselves that my property somehow belonged to them. Before we dive in, comment where you are watching from, give a like to this video and subscribe to give support to this channel. It all started with a letter. A thick, official-looking envelope from the Homeowners Association slipped neatly into my mailbox like a venomous snake waiting to strike. The paper inside was crisp, the ink bold and threatening. Notice of violation. My stomach twisted as I read through the nonsense they had scribbled down in that legalese gibberish. Something about unauthorized structures encroaching on community land, and a demand to cease all usage immediately. I frowned, my fingers tightening around the paper. Encroaching? On whose land? This was my property, every inch of it paid for fair and square. I knew that for a fact. But the HOA? They had different plans. At first, I thought it was just some mix-up, maybe a clerical error. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I went straight to the HOA office, expecting a quick resolution. The office was tucked inside the community clubhouse, a place that reeked of stale coffee and cheap authority. The moment I stepped in, I was met with a pair of condescending eyes belonging to Dorothy Whitman, the self-proclaimed president of our HOA. Dorothy was the kind of woman who thrived on control. Everything about her, from her iron-stiff posture to the way she held her clipboard like a scepter, screamed entitlement. She wasn't alone either. Beside her sat Todd, the HOA vice president, a pudgy man with a permanent smirk and an attitude that dripped arrogance. "Ah, Mr. Johnson," Dorothy said, feigning surprise as if she hadn't expected me to show up after their little stunt. "What can we do for you today?" I handed her the letter, watching as she took her sweet time scanning over it. "I got this in my mailbox this morning," I said, keeping my voice level. "And I think there's been a mistake. This is my property we're talking about." Dorothy exchanged a glance with Todd, then folded her hands over the desk. "Oh, there's no mistake," she said smoothly. "The HOA has recently reviewed property boundaries, and it turns out a portion of your land falls within the association's designated community space. We're simply ensuring that all properties remain compliant." I stared at her. "Community space?" I nearly laughed. "Dorothy, that's my backyard. My fence has been there for 10 years. I have the deed, the survey, everything. That land is mine." Todd leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against his palm. "Well, technically," he drawled, "there was a slight oversight in the original mapping of the neighborhood. The association is just correcting that now." Correcting it, my ass. This wasn't a mistake. It was a land grab. And I wasn't about to roll over and let them take what was mine. I went home that night fuming. I dug through my filing cabinets until I found every document proving my property's rightful boundaries. The original deed, the lot survey, even the records from the last time the county inspected the land. I wasn't imagining things. The HOA was flat out lying. The next day, armed with my paperwork, I stormed back into their little clubhouse, ready to put an end to their nonsense. But when I got there, I found something that made my blood turn to ice. A construction crew. They were already on my land. Digging. I felt my heart hammer against my ribs as I marched over to the nearest worker. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing?" I barked. The guy barely looked up. "HOA orders," he said with a shrug. "We're just following instructions." Dorothy and Todd were standing off to the side, watching it all unfold like smug little dictators. The moment they spotted me, Dorothy gave me that same patronizing smile. "Mr. Johnson," she purred, "I was just about to inform you, we've decided to move forward with reclaiming the land. You're more than welcome to file a formal dispute, but the board has already made its decision." I felt my fists clench at my sides. "This isn't a decision for the HOA to make. You're trespassing. You have no right to do this." Dorothy's smile didn't waver. "We have every right," she said. "Our legal team has reviewed the matter extensively. Any attempt to interfere could result in fines or legal action." I stood there, fists shaking, watching as my own land was ripped apart right in front of me. That's when I knew this wasn't going to be a polite little battle of paperwork. This was war. I stood frozen, watching as the construction crew tore into my land like a pack of wild animals. The roar of machinery filled the air, drowning out the pounding in my chest. One of the workers, a stocky man in a reflective vest, glanced at me but quickly looked away, like he knew something was off. I wasn't about to stand here and watch my own property get stolen right in front of me. I stormed toward the foreman, my voice slicing through the chaos. Hey, who gave you permission to do this? The man wiped sweat off his forehead and pointed lazily toward the HOA office. Orders from the association. They said this land is being converted into a community space. Community space? On my property? I clenched my fist. Stop everything. Right now. The foreman shrugged. Sorry, but we got permits. Permits? That was impossible. I never signed anything. I yanked my phone from my pocket and dialed the county office. If the HOA had managed to forge documents to claim my land, I needed to shut it down immediately. The line rang and a bored-sounding woman answered. Ma'am, this is urgent. My HOA claims they have permits to seize my land for a community space. I never agreed to this. There was a long pause. Then she sighed. Sir, I don't see any permit requests under your property. The ground shifted under my feet. No permits? That meant they were bluffing. My pulse quickened as I turned back to the construction crew. Pack it up. You don't have legal permission to be here. The foreman scratched his head. Well, that's a problem then. HOA hired us for the next 2 weeks. I took a deep breath, my mind racing. If they didn't have permits, then who the hell was pulling the strings? A slow clap echoed behind me. I spun around to see Dorothy standing there, smug as ever. Todd loomed beside her, arms crossed like a bodyguard. Dorothy gave me a sickly sweet smile. Oh dear, did you really think we'd go through the county for this? No need to bother with all that red tape. My stomach turned. You don't have the legal right to take my land. Todd scoffed. And yet here we are. I took a step toward them, forcing myself to stay calm. This is fraud. You do not own my land. And I just confirmed with the county, you never even applied for a permit. Dorothy's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she composed herself. Oh darling. You misunderstand. The HOA doesn't need county approval to reclaim neglected spaces. Neglected? I narrowed my eyes. That's a lie. My land isn't neglected. Todd pulled out a folder, flipping it open dramatically. Inside were photos, ones I had never seen before. Pictures of my property, but digitally altered to make it look overgrown and abandoned. I grabbed the folder and examined the photos closely. The grass was taller than I had ever let it grow, the fences looked broken, and even the windows of my house were edited to look like they were covered in grime. I met Dorothy's gaze. This is fake. She sighed as if she were talking to a toddler. Well, the community believes it's real. And as of this morning, the board voted unanimously to rezone this land for public use. I nearly laughed at the absurdity. That's not how it works. Todd smirked. Are you sure? Something about his confidence made my stomach churn. What did they do? Before I could respond, a police cruiser pulled up to my driveway. A tall officer stepped out, his expression unreadable. Dorothy turned to him with a dramatic sigh. Oh, thank goodness, officer. This man has been threatening our construction crew. We just want to improve the community. I blinked. Threatening? The officer's gaze flicked between us before settling on me. Sir, is that true? This was a setup. They had planned this. I squared my shoulders. No, officer. I am the rightful owner of this land. The HOA is trying to illegally seize it without permits. Dorothy let out a gasp. Oh my. That's a terrible accusation. Todd stepped forward. If he doesn't cooperate, we'll be forced to take legal action. My blood boiled. They had planned every step of this. The fake photos, the sudden construction, and now dragging the police into it? They wanted me to either back down or get arrested. The officer sighed, glancing between Dorothy and me. I could see hesitation in his eyes. He wasn't buying their act entirely. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. Sir, according to the HOA's complaint, this land was donated by you. Everything inside me froze. Excuse me? My voice was barely above a whisper. The officer held up a copy of a signed document with my name scrawled at the bottom. A document I had never seen before in my life. Dorothy tilted her head, smiling like a snake. You really should keep better track of your paperwork. The world spun around me. They had done the unthinkable. They had forged my signature. And the police believed them. For the first time, I felt genuinely trapped. How the hell was I going to fight this? As the dust settled from my latest confrontation with the HOA, I realized I had underestimated them. The sudden disappearance of the mysterious documents only confirmed my suspicion. They were willing to go to extreme lengths to bury their mistakes. But what they didn't know was that I had already taken precautions. I had made copies of everything. Every shady clause, every absurd restriction, and every forged signature was safely stored away. That night, a sense of paranoia crept over me. Were they watching? Waiting for the perfect moment to strike again? I double-checked the locks on my doors and windows. Just as I was about to call it a night, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. A distorted voice came through the line. "You're making a mistake." Then the call disconnected. Chills ran down my spine. This wasn't just about an HOA anymore. This was something bigger. The next morning, I woke up to a strange, sickening sight. My entire front lawn was buried under piles of official-looking violation notices, stacked so high they blocked my door. Hundreds of them. Every single one listed a ridiculous fine: grass half an inch too tall, mailbox at an incorrect angle, front light fixture too bright at night. It was an outright declaration of war. I stepped outside to find a familiar face watching me from across the street. Gerald, the HOA president, smirking behind his newspaper. He didn't say a word, but his message was clear. They were trying to break me. Fine. If they wanted a fight, they were going to get one. I gathered all the violation notices and stuffed them into a trash bag. Then I pulled out my phone and called the local news station. If the HOA wanted to play dirty, I was going to drag their name through every mud pit I could find. But before I could press send on the email, a loud bang echoed through the neighborhood. My heart stopped. I rushed outside and froze. My car tires had been slashed. Every single one. And right there, in bold red paint across my garage door, were the words. The street was eerily quiet as I walked back into my house, locking the door behind me. My heart was still pounding from the confrontation with the HOA board. I knew they wouldn't back down easily, but the way their faces twisted with rage when I called their bluff, it felt like a temporary win. The problem was, temporary wasn't good enough. They were plotting something. I could feel it. The next morning, I woke up to an unexpected email. The subject line alone made my stomach drop. Immediate compliance required, HOA violation. I clicked it open, my hands tightening into fists as I read the notice. Apparently, my house was now in violation of multiple previously unmentioned HOA policies. Everything from the shade of my fence to the placement of my mailbox was being called into question. This wasn't just retaliation. This was war. I stepped outside, determined to confront them head-on, but what I saw made me stop in my tracks. There were workers on my property, ripping out my mailbox, measuring my fence, marking my yard with red spray paint. My own land was being invaded. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" I shouted, storming toward them. One of the workers, a lanky guy in a neon vest, barely looked at me as he responded, "Just following HOA orders, sir." "You're in violation." Violation? I was about to argue when a familiar voice cut through the morning air. Well. Looks like someone didn't read the new HOA guidelines. I turned and saw Marcia, the HOA president, standing smugly on the sidewalk. She was holding a clipboard, watching my reaction with pure satisfaction. "You can't just do this." I snapped. "I own this property." "Oh, but according to HOA guidelines," she purred, flipping a page on her clipboard, "any land modifications or unsanctioned structures are subject to immediate correction. And since you refused to comply voluntarily, we've taken the liberty of handling it for you." I clenched my jaw. I had spent weeks proving their boundary claim was a lie, and now they were just making up violations to keep me under their thumb. I took a step forward, but before I could say another word, Marcia's expression changed. A smirk twitched at the corners of her lips as she pulled out a folded piece of paper and held it up in front of me. "You should probably sit down for this one." I snatched the paper from her hands, my eyes scanning the bolded words at the top. Notice of eminent domain seizure. My brain short-circuited. Eminent domain? That was a law typically used by the government to claim private property for public use. Roads, utilities, city projects. But an HOA? They had no government power? Or did they? I looked up at her, stunned. "This is a joke." Marcia laughed. "Oh, I assure you it's not. You see, we've partnered with a development company that's interested in improving our little community. And unfortunately for you, your house happens to be right in the middle of their expansion plan." I barely heard the rest. My blood was roaring in my ears. They weren't just after my land. They were trying to erase me. I clenched the paper in my hands. "This won't stand." Marcia leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Try and stop us." She turned on her heel and strutted away, leaving me frozen in place as the workers continued dismantling my property. I had thought the fight was about property lines and petty violations. But now, they had just declared all-out war. and they had no idea what was coming next. The tension in the neighborhood had reached a boiling point, and I knew the HOA wasn't going to back down without a fight. The morning after my surprise legal counterattack, I noticed something odd. Their usual smug confidence seemed shaken. For the first time I saw doubt in their eyes. But the silence didn't last long. Later that evening, a black sedan with tinted windows rolled up near my property. It didn't belong to anyone in the neighborhood. The car sat there for hours, unmoving. Watching. Waiting. A chill crept up my spine. This was no coincidence. The HOA had taken things to a new level. The next morning I walked out to find my mailbox hanging open. Inside was a single folded piece of paper. No envelope, no return address. Just a message scrawled in thick black ink. You're making a mistake. Walk away. That was it. No signature. No threats. But the meaning was crystal clear. I glanced around, scanning the street. The sedan was gone. But something told me I was far from alone. If they thought intimidation would work, they were sorely mistaken. I was past the point of fear. This was personal now. I spent the next few hours installing security cameras at every possible angle, making sure every inch of my property was covered. I also made a few calls to my lawyer, a local news station, and an old friend who happened to be a retired police detective. If the HOA wanted a war, they were about to get one. But the real twist came that night. A sudden crash jolted me awake around 2 a.m. I bolted upright, heart pounding. My security cameras had just gone live on my phone, sending an alert. Motion detected. I clicked on the feed and what I saw made my blood run cold. A hooded figure was crouching near my fence, doing something to one of the posts. Then another shadow moved across my yard. There were two of them. And they weren't just trespassing, they were digging. Digging for what? I grabbed my phone about to call the police, but then I hesitated. No. I needed to see this play out. I needed proof. I turned off my house lights, quietly opened the door, and slipped out into the night. The figures were too focused on their task to notice me creeping up. My heart pounded in my ears as I got closer. Then I saw it. One of them was holding something. A plastic bag filled with dirt? No documents. They were burying something on my property. And that's when it hit me. The HOA wasn't just trying to intimidate me. They were trying to frame me. And I had just caught them red-handed. My pulse pounded in my ears as I stood frozen in the darkness, watching the two figures burying something on my property. Every instinct screamed at me to call the cops, but something told me this was bigger than just trespassing. They were planting evidence. For what? Fraud? Drugs? Something worse? I took a deep breath, tightening my grip on my phone. If I startled them now, they'd scatter, and I'd have nothing but grainy security footage. No, this had to be handled right. I crept back, careful not to make a sound, and did the only thing I could think of. I called my lawyer. Get over here. Now. 15 minutes later, headlights cut through the darkness as a familiar SUV rolled up. My lawyer, Greg, a no-nonsense man who had seen his fair share of legal battles, stepped out, scanning my expression. You weren't kidding, he muttered as I showed him the security feed. The two figures were still there, still digging. Greg's jaw tightened. They're planting evidence. If you dig it up first, they'll claim you tampered with it. If you call the police now, they'll say they were just cleaning up debris. Either way, the HOA wins. I exhaled sharply. Then what do? Greg pulled out his phone. We outplay them. He made 2 calls, one to the police chief who owed him a favor and one to a private investigator. I didn't know who he was calling at first, but when I heard the words, I need a forensic sweep of the property, quietly, I knew Greg was playing chess while the HOA was busy scribbling in a rulebook. We stayed put, watching as the two figures finished their job. Then just before slipping away, they snapped a photo of the buried stash, clear evidence that they intended to use this later. That's when it clicked. They weren't just planting evidence. They were setting up a scandal. For me. Greg glanced at me, his voice low and serious. They want you arrested. If they can frame you for a crime, you'll be too busy defending yourself to fight them in court. And just like that, I knew exactly what I had to do. I had to flip the script before they got the chance. The next morning, I did something they never saw coming. I called a press conference. Not just any press conference. I made sure local journalists, the HOA board members, and the entire neighborhood were invited. I even sent out anonymous tips to news stations, hinting at shocking corruption within the HOA. By noon, my front yard was packed with reporters, cameras flashing, microphones shoved in my face. The HOA board members had no choice but to show up, trying to play it cool. And that's when I dropped the bombshell. What? On camera? I dug up the evidence in front of everyone. With reporters rolling, I pulled out the plastic-wrapped documents, holding them up for all to see. Someone tried to bury this on my land. Someone wanted to frame me. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The HOA president's face turned ghostly pale. Then I held up my phone, playing the security footage, clear shots of the two hooded figures sneaking onto my property, digging, planting the very evidence I just uncovered. The reporters went wild. The HOA tried to deny it, until I zoomed in on the footage and revealed the face of one of their own board members. And that's when the real panic began. For a moment there was absolute silence. Then chaos. Reporters shouted over one another, cameras zoomed in on the frozen, pale-faced HOA board member caught red-handed in the footage. The crowd of neighbors murmured in disbelief, some gasping, others shaking their heads. The HOA president, Mr. Carmichael, tried to recover. This is outrageous, he bellowed, stepping forward with forced authority. There's no proof that's even real. You could have doctored that footage. Wrong move. I was ready for this. I smirked, held up a flash drive and tossed it to one of the reporters. That's the full security footage. Time-stamped. Watermarked. Verified. Before Carmichael could sputter out another excuse, one of the journalists played the footage live on his laptop, turning the screen toward the crowd. The gasps turned into shouts. Then, like sharks sensing blood, the neighbors started closing in on the HOA board members. "This is disgusting," a woman near the front yelled. "That's my property tax money going to criminals," an older man bellowed. Someone threw a water bottle. It barely missed Carmichael's head. He flinched, sweat forming at his brow. The HOA members behind him were already backing away, their fight-or-flight instincts kicking in. And then sirens. A police cruiser pulled up. Then another. And another. Carmichael looked like he was about to faint. Greg, my lawyer, stepped forward, cool as ever. "I called the police this morning," he announced, addressing both the crowd and the press. "After seeing this footage, we have overwhelming evidence of trespassing, fraud, and conspiracy to commit a crime." A collective hush fell over the crowd. The officers didn't even hesitate. They marched straight up to Carmichael and the sweating board members. "Mr. Carmichael," the lead officer said, "you're under arrest for criminal trespassing and evidence tampering." Carmichael lost it. "You can't do this. I'm a respectable man. You have no right." The officer shut him up real fast with a crisp, practiced reading of his Miranda rights. The moment the cuffs clicked around his wrists, his cronies scattered like cockroaches. But the police were faster. Before they could escape, 2 more HOA members were snatched up and thrown into squad cars. The neighborhood erupted in cheers. And me? I just stood there watching it all unfold, the fall of the HOA empire, their once untouchable power crumbling before my eyes. But I knew this wasn't over. Because something still wasn't right. Carmichael wasn't the mastermind. I could see it in his face, the sheer, unfiltered panic of a man who just realized he was a pawn in someone else's game. That's when my stomach turned. If Carmichael was just a middleman, that meant someone else was still out there. And they weren't done yet. The celebration was short-lived. As the police cars disappeared into the night, taking Carmichael and his cronies with them, I felt the weight of what just happened settling in. My land was safe, the corrupt HOA was exposed, and the entire neighborhood had witnessed it. But something still felt off. Greg must have noticed my expression because he leaned in. "What's wrong? You just took down an entire corrupt HOA. You should be celebrating." I wanted to. I really did. But that nagging feeling wouldn't go away. "Carmichael wasn't the mastermind," I muttered, my eyes scanning the dispersing crowd. "That guy's a fraud, sure. But he wasn't pulling the strings." Greg frowned. "You think someone else was behind this?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. A new email. No subject. No sender. Just a single sentence. "You made a mistake." My stomach dropped. I spun around, scanning the street. The neighbors were still talking in excited clusters, but nothing looked out of place. The police were gone. The reporters had packed up. But suddenly my house felt too exposed. I clicked the email open and an attachment popped up, a photo of me, standing in my yard. Just now. A cold chill ran down my spine. Someone was watching. Greg must have seen my face because he grabbed my phone and cursed under his breath. Where the hell did this come from? Before I could respond, another email arrived. Subject, HOA 2.0. This time the message was longer. "You really thought it was over? You embarrassed a few pawns. You haven't even met the king yet. We'll be in touch." No name. No number. Just a threat. My pulse pounded. This wasn't just about some power-hungry HOA board anymore. This was bigger, darker. And whoever was behind it was still watching. Greg exhaled sharply. I don't like this. You need to be careful. I nodded, my mind already racing. If they wanted me scared, they failed. If anything, they just made me angry. I wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. But one thing was clear. This fight wasn't over. It was just getting started.